In Luke 4, there's the story of John the Baptist, and he's been out preaching for Jesus and paving the way for the Messiah. And Jesus comes to the water where John the Baptist is baptizing people. And he says, "Hey, John, you need to baptize me." And John the Baptist goes, "I know that's in my name, but I'm not going to baptize you." And he's like, but it's in your name right there. And he says, so they talk for just a minute, and Jesus convinces him that this is what needs to take place. Jesus needs to be baptized by John the Baptist. And so Jesus goes down into the water. Many of you know this story. If you don't, it's in Luke chapter 4. And as Jesus goes down, he's baptized, he comes out of the water, and we see this moment where the Trinity fully reveals themselves in Scripture. And you have Jesus coming out of the water, and you have the Spirit of God descending like a dove on Jesus. And then the Father's voice speaks over Jesus and says, "This is my Son, whom I love, and I am proud of him." And Jesus has this moment with everyone around where, as a son, his Father speaks identity over him. And he has this choice to rise up into that identity, just as we have this choice as we meditate on Scripture, as we spend time in worship, as we spend time in prayer, as people pray over us, as the Lord speaks to us by his Spirit and speaks identity over us. We have a choice to receive it by faith and to rise into it and to live it out. And Jesus had this spoken over him: "You're my son, I love you, I'm proud of you." And then the Scripture goes on to say that immediately after that took place, what happens? The Spirit leads Jesus out into the wilderness to be tempted. And in these moments of temptation, what's actually taking place is that this identity that the Father has spoken over him is being challenged out in the desert place. And so the tempter comes to him with these three temptations and says, "Are you really God's son? Is it really true what he just said about you? Is it? Because I don't believe it. But if you could turn these rocks into bread, I would believe you. If you can perform this miracle, if you can prove it, if you would just worship me. Are you really God's son? Are you really going to be seated on the throne? If you're really, why don't you worship me and I'll give you the nations?" Or the tempter brings him up onto the temple and above it and says, "Throw yourself off. If you're really God's son, surely he would catch you before you hit the ground." See, what's happening is each one of these temptations wasn't trying to get Jesus to sin, to make a mistake, to stumble. These temptations were trying to get Jesus to walk back off of the identity that his Father had just spoken over his life. You think far too small of yourself if you think that the enemy exists to get you tripped up and to stumble into sin. The enemy is after your identity, not just your behavior. And we think, I can't do this thing, and I can't do that thing, and I can't do that thing. And so again, we go back to having lists. All the while, the question remains, who do you say I am? And do you believe who I say you are? And are you going to live in this identity or in something temporary that is giving you identity? The enemy is not after you to get you to break a secret rule, to sin, just to make a mistake. The enemy wants you to live below the reality of what Jesus Christ accomplished for us. He is attacking Jesus' work through you. And when we stand in it, it becomes a place in our lives where we say, this is the reign and the realm of Jesus. And as I stand in my identity, I don't have to worry about all of these temptations. In fact, the temptations that come become very instructive to you discovering where you have placed your identity in temporary things.